Good afternoon, and welcome to St. Edward's University. My name is Richard Bouch. I'm a professor here in our Department of Religious and Theological Studies, and I also serve as director of the Holy Cross Institute. It's my privilege to welcome you to this semi-annual Bishop John McCarthy lecture on the Catholic Church in the 21st century. As one of 8 Holy Cross colleges and universities in the United States, St. Edward's values its deep connections with the 7 other institutions that share a heritage with the congregations of Holy Cross. Today, we are honored to welcome to the Hilltop the president of one of the most storied Holy Cross colleges in North America, St. Mary's College in Notre Dame, Indiana. Founded in 1844, St. Mary's has been shaped by generations of remarkable leaders. Dr. Katie Conboy is the college's 14th president. She assumed office in 2020 and within a year launched a bold and visionary strategic plan. A true Holy Cross leader, Dr. Conboy is dedicated to advancing the social and economic empowerment of women, strengthening St. Mary's tradition of providing undergraduate women with a rigorous liberal arts education, and expanding opportunities for all students through their graduate programs. Dr. Conboy's vision for the growth and identity of St. Mary's over the next decade serves as a national model for Catholic higher education. We very much look forward to her McCarthy lecture today, which is entitled Cleaving to Mission, Catholic and Holy Cross Education as an Antidote to Division. In a moment, our president, Dr. Montserrat Fuentes, will introduce President Conboy and tell you more about her contributions and impact. Now, we pause to respectfully acknowledge that St. Edward's University sits on the land of the Comanche and the Apache peoples, as well as the Coahuiltecan and the Tonkawa peoples. We remember their continued connection to this region and give thanks for the opportunity to live, work, learn, and pray on their traditional homeland. We pay our respects to elders past and present. We recognize the grave harm and injustices brought by colonialism, not only to indigenous peoples, but also to those of African identity who were stolen from their homes and enslaved. We grieve the vast loss of life, languages, and traditions. And we deeply regret our own community's role in slavery, segregation, and upholding systemic racism. As a Holy Cross institution of education and transformation, we seek to learn, reconcile, and bring healing by addressing the wrongs of the past and acting now and in the future to bring about a better time. Thank you. Now it is my pleasure to invite Dr. Fuentes to introduce our speaker.
Good evening, and welcome to this spring's most Reverend John McCarthy Lecture on the Catholic Church in the 21st century. It is a true joy to be with you this evening, and an even greater joy to introduce someone who exemplifies what it really means to lead with both purpose and heart, Dr. Katie Conboy. Dr. Conboy is a deeply respected leader in Holy Cross higher education and a tireless advocate for mission-centered learning. Since 2020, she has served as the 14th president of St. Mary's College, guiding the institution through some of the most challenging moments in recent history, always with grace, wisdom, and an unwavering commitment to the values that define Catholic education. Her leadership journey spans more than 30 years, rooted always in Catholic liberal arts and women's education. Before St. Mary's, she served as the provost and senior vice president at Simmons University in Boston, where she led transformative academic initiatives and expanded opportunities for students through innovation and a strategic vision. Her long-standing tenure at Stonehill College, another Holy Cross institution, included roles such as a beloved professor of English literature and later also as provost and vice president for academic affairs, always with an eye toward nurturing community, academic excellence, and mission alignment. Dr. Conboy is also a scholar with a keen intellect and a compassionate lens, having published widely in feminist theory, Irish literature, and modern fiction. Her co-edited volume, Writing on the Body, Female Embodiment and Feminist Theory, remains a foundational text in the field. She holds a PhD in English literature from the University of Notre Dame and a bachelor's degree from the University of Kansas, along with executive training from both the University of Chicago and Harvard. This evening, Dr. Conboy invites us into a timely and meaningful conversation through her lecture, Cleaving to Mission, Catholic and Holy Cross Education as an Antidote to Division. In a world often marked by discourse and disconnection, her insights remind us of the healing, unifying, and enduring power of our shared educational mission. It is such an honor to welcome a leader whose voice and vision inspire both hope and action. So please join me in giving a very, very warm welcome to Dr. Katie Conboy.
Well, thank you, Monse. Thank you, Richard. It's wonderful to be here on your beautiful, beautiful campus on a beautiful day. I left a very stormy South Bend, Indiana, so I'm happy to have come to what they call a better place. And so today I look forward to sharing some thoughts with you on the topic that you see on the screen. But first, I just want to say that I'm truly delighted to be part of the Reverend John McCarthy lecture series on the Catholic Church in the 21st century. And I just want to thank everyone who puts this together for inviting me to offer my reflections this evening. I have the privilege also of being a friend of Dr. Fuentes, and so it's wonderful to be here and to have the opportunity to enrich our professional and personal connection. So I want to start by just saying, those of us who work in Catholic colleges or universities sponsored by the Congregation of Holy Cross are aware of Father Basil Moreau. There he is. His very innovative vision for three distinct societies, sisters, brothers, and priests, to unite in an apostolic institute that mirrors the Holy Family. He assigned each patron a group, each group a patron, consecrating the sisters to the Immaculate Heart of Mary, the brothers to the pure heart of Saint Joseph, and the priests to the Sacred Heart of Jesus. In other words, we actually work inside a model founded on an ideal of unity. Unity that respects and recognizes difference is in short supply in our contemporary world. In my career, I've spent 36 years at 3 different Holy Cross institutions, 5 years in graduate school at the University of Notre Dame, 26 years, 13 on the faculty, 13 in administration at Stonehill College, and now 5 years at St. Mary's College, where I have the privilege to serve as president. This image is the image of the iconic Gothic building, Lamont Hall, which you'll see on our campus when you come to visit. You can see it being built in 1925. This is the centennial year for Lamont Hall. So the sisters who founded St. Mary's in 1844 have always lived by the commitment to read the signs of the times and respond to them. And their work in this regard is part of the larger vision of the congregation. Today, perhaps more than ever, the signs we are reading call for respectful engagement, for skillful bridge building, and for dialogue about how a renewal of Catholic identity can serve as an enabling force for good. Now, I mention a renewal of Catholic identity because Catholic higher education is not immune to the divisiveness of our contemporary moment. Both inside and outside our institutions, there are competing narratives about what makes a Catholic college Catholic. And I find too often that narrative also focuses on what our Catholic identity prevents or prohibits, rather than what it validates, enables, and empowers. So in framing my remarks for today, I've been meditating on the word cleave. Cleave is one of a handful of contronyms. I'm sure you've heard of synonyms and you've heard of antonyms, but I don't know if you would have heard of contronyms. But a contronym in the English language is a word that means both one thing and also means its opposite. Other contronyms are words like dust, which might mean to add fine particles, for example, to dust a rolling pin with flour, or to remove fine particles, like dust the shelves. Another contronym is buckle, which can mean to fasten or secure, as in a sentence like, she buckled her belt, or to break or collapse, as in, he buckled under pressure. To cleave denotes both a separation and a conjoining. Cleaving can mean splitting, severing, dividing, splintering, chopping up. Think of a sentence like, the axe easily cleaves the log. Or, Julia Child can cleave a whole roast duck in two. Or visualize an object that is cloven. That's the adjective related to cleave, like the cloven or split hooves of mammals such as deer, cattle, goats, and sheep, including hilltoppers. Or the artistic representations, starting in the Middle Ages, as you see on the right, of the devil as having cloven feet. And then cleave can mean the exact opposite, sticking fast to something, attaching to, adhering to, bonding to. You might tell me that you cleave to the friendships of your childhood. I might tell you that I cleave to my principles. And the second chapter of Genesis says, a man shall leave his father and mother and cleave to his wife. So with this complex contronym, cleave, in mind, my talk today will focus on how Catholic colleges and universities can cleave to their mission as a strategy for navigating the sometimes tricky, sometimes treacherous terrain of our cloven culture, our divided and riven times. And since I'm here at St. Edward's University and coming from another Holy Cross institution, I will also consider some of the challenges and opportunities for our 8 Holy Cross colleges and universities as we continue to strive for what we might call the unity in difference promised by Blessed Basil Moreau's vision of Holy Cross as the Holy Family. But before I offer some attempts at describing how our institutions might provide an antidote to the poisonous divisiveness that characterizes our current moment, let's spend just a few moments establishing what our cultural divisions actually are and the possible causes for them. The fragmentation and divisiveness in America today are not simple matters. They stem from a combination of economic, social, political, and technological factors. At the broadest level, we seem to have lost a shared sense of national purpose. That purpose, which was always an ideal, has, over our history, promoted freedom, opportunity, peace, justice, security, and cooperation for all. We have a galvanizing origin story that establishes our democracy. It promises life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness in the Declaration of Independence. It establishes a unifying "we the people" statement in the Constitution, which names the cooperative branches of government with separate powers. I might add some emphasis on cooperative branches. and it enshrines our most prized freedoms in the Bill of Rights. Not unlike Basil Moreau's vision of unity that recognizes difference, our nation's founding fathers also had a vision of unity. E pluribus unum, out of many, one, which is emblazoned across the scroll and clenched in the eagle's beak on the Great Seal of the United States. Now, in saying all this optimistic and positive information about our founding fathers, I certainly don't want to ignore our exceptionalist blunders or the blind spots and the hubris of our forebears who seized sovereign land, displaced and enslaved other humans, and suppressed the rights of women. I loved hearing your land acknowledgement statement because it acknowledged those very things. But we can still point to these idealistic documents as formalizing what was probably the first version of what we call today the American dream, a dream that is about much more than an individual's ability to pursue economic success. It's about a collective dream to lift everyone into a more abundant life. Today, however, many people feel that that dream is simply not attainable for them. Economic disparities have increased in the United States over recent decades, and the gap between the wealthy and the poor has widened dramatically, leading to frustration and resentment. Of all the factors contributing to our fractured society, the shift in economic opportunity is probably the bedrock issue. An inability to earn a decent salary and to support oneself and one's loved ones truly does translate into less life, less liberty, and less happiness. Now, if you don't spend a lot of time thinking about the income gap in our country, it's time to start paying attention to it. For the second quarter of 2024, the St. Louis Fed's Institute for Economic Equity reported that the top 10% of US households by wealth had $6.9 million on average. As a group, they held 67% of total US household wealth. The top 10% held 67% of US household wealth. The bottom 50% of households by wealth, 50%, had $51,000 on average. And as a group, that bottom 50% held only 2.5% of total household wealth. The story gets worse. Black families owned, we're talking about last year, folks, this is 2024. Black families owned about 23 cents for every $1 of white family wealth on average. Hispanic families owned about 19 cents for every $1 of white family wealth on average. And even more important to our higher education context, families headed by someone with some college education but no four-year degree had only 30 cents for every $1 of wealth held by families headed by four-year college graduates. That dips to 22 cents in families headed by someone with only a high school diploma, and 9 cents in families headed by someone with less than a high school diploma. I say this to remind all of us that education lifts real human beings out of compromised and compromising circumstances and breaks patterns of multi-generational poverty. But the very students who might benefit most from education in terms of social mobility often believe that a college degree is out of their reach. Now, these economic divisions are sometimes looked at in physical and social terms, where a sort of geographic sorting has led to the feeling that there are two Americas. Sometimes it's urban America versus rural America, or it's coastal America versus middle America. And it's a simple fact that automation and outsourcing of jobs has disproportionately affected rural and industrial areas. Economic frustration often gets tied to political views, and we can easily see how our political system has become polarized. Our two major parties have, through most of history, looked something like two circles in a Venn diagram, with some overlap in what each stands for. But today, it feels like a cleaver has hacked them into full separateness, with competing ideologies and little to no collaboration or common ground. Indeed, voting maps of the United States show that such partitioning has been exacerbated by geographical mobility. People increasingly move to places where they perceive there are people aligned with their beliefs, and they thereby create and reinforce their own echo chambers by voluntarily reducing their exposure to different perspectives. And technology, of course, has completely changed when and how people get their news and information, which results in a highly fragmented media landscape. There are no longer very many shared synthesizing moments when Americans sit down and hear, for example, the same nightly news or experience the same shared trusted source of information. Instead, many Americans get their information on social media platforms that sometimes have very little vetting of content. These platforms have enabled people to find like-minded communities, and there's nothing wrong with that. But they have also amplified extreme views and made it easier to spread misinformation that can quickly become disinformation. Algorithms often promote whatever content engages more users, which can mean that controversial or divisive topics get more attention on these sites, and users are rarely exposed to alternative viewpoints. Many people actually seek out news that confirms their biases, and this makes it harder for all of us to agree on basic facts, let alone on real solutions to the social problems that we are all perceiving from different vantage points. And finally, all this disagreement and discord is taking place in a particular demographic context where increasing racial, ethnic, and cultural diversity is with us to stay. Some people feel uneasy or threatened by these population changes. Others feel energized by them. But it is harder to find common ground if people align themselves first and primarily with their identity groups, such as race, gender, or sexuality. We need to find ways to empower marginalized groups while simultaneously maintaining a focus on the common good. That is, we need to remain committed to equity and equality and to building bridges that connect us and keep us from becoming islands. I hope you're seeing how all these things are tied together, how economic inequity, social isolation, entrenched political polarization, and ubiquitous technology, all of these accelerating in our rapidly changing demographic context, have contributed to our divided culture, where we seem powerless to hear each other, unable to listen harder, and unwilling to join organizations, neighborhoods, and even virtual communities where people are different from us. More than 25 years ago, Harvard political scientist Robert Putnam, in his book Bowling Alone, The Collapse and Revival of an American Community, argued that joining social organizations such as clubs, churches, and community groups, as well as participating in community activities, is crucial for the well-being of both individuals and society. His key point is that social capital, the networks of relationships and trust that are built through active engagement in groups, is essential for a functioning democracy and also for economic prosperity and personal happiness. Putnam emphasizes that joining something, whether a club, a church, or community group, fosters connection with others, encourages cooperation, and provides a sense of belonging. This active participation helps to combat social isolation, and it creates a stronger, more resilient society. He also observes that declining membership in such groups, especially over the past several decades, has contributed to social fragmentation, a decline in trust, and a decline in civic engagement and community life. Putnam argues that by re-engaging with such activities and organizations, we can restore the bonds that connect us and strengthen the fabric of society. Now, I read Bowling Alone many years ago, and I followed Putnam's work for well over 2 decades. Last year, I attended the showing of a new documentary film based on research by Robert Putnam. The film, Join or Die, it's a pretty stark imperative, explores and extends the work Putnam has published over his long career. Putnam wants all of us to be aware of the profound, positive health impacts associated with joining a club or an organization. He wants us to know that individuals who are more socially connected tend to have lower rates of illness, to live longer, and to experience better overall well-being. Long before the pandemic created a period where we all experienced required social isolation, Putnam had asserted that over the course of the 20th century, our American culture first embraced and then gradually but decidedly moved away from creating and sustaining the kinds of community organizations that helped people build social capital. We went from being people who embraced memberships and fostered communal gatherings. There are photographs of Eleanor Roosevelt and her vast collection of membership cards to the organizations she belonged to. But we went from that to people saying, I'm not a joiner. In some ways, it's discouraging to read about how every kind of social networking has plummeted in the US. From fraternal organizations like the Odd Fellows, you see their little crest over here on the left, or the Knights of Columbus, there they are in uniform on the right, and even cartoon characters like Fred Flintstone and Barney Rubble had the Loyal Order of Water Buffalo. And these are the kinds of organizations, along with things like bowling, which explains Bowling Alone as the title for Putnam's book, and picnicking were things that brought people together and that people do a lot less of today. Volunteerism is also on the wane. But I would point out that the subtitle of Bowling Alone is the collapse and revival of American community. And his new book, The Upswing, has a similarly optimistic subtitle, How America Came Together a Century Ago and How We Can Do It Again. So in many ways, these realities that I'm describing, from the forces, economic, political, and other that are working on us, to the sort of decline of engagement, in many ways, these make the work we do at Catholic colleges and universities even more important. We can help students to develop their faith in meaningful ways. We can encourage them to raise their hands, to join clubs and organizations, to be ambassadors for dialogue, and if we do it well, to develop habits of committed citizenship, participation, and leadership that will continue to enrich them for the rest of their lives. Now, I promised you some antidotes to divisiveness and a cloven world, so let's dig into the special province of Catholic higher education and consider some specific ways our sector can provide remedies to this divisive culture, how to explore cleaving to our Catholic identity and how it makes us leaders and ethical unifiers in an era of discord, estrangement, and isolation. The first essential element, it's funny to me that the Flintstones are going to stay up here for a few minutes. The first essential element that we prize in our institutions is a curriculum designed to promote 3 outcomes: a strong moral foundation, an emphasis on critical thinking, and a commitment to the common good. At all times, but especially in times when political, social, and cultural tensions are high, our institutions offer a distinctive approach to education that balances faith and reason and that equips students to navigate complex issues with wisdom and empathy. We require courses in theology, philosophy, and ethics, and in other humanities, because we know these disciplines give students a space to engage with different perspectives and to develop a moral compass that guides their own life decisions. We trust that this will provide the bedrock for decisions that promote unity rather than division. Recently, I had the opportunity to hear from Donna Carroll, president of the Association of Catholic Colleges and Universities, about a study involving data from the Georgetown Center for Education and the Workforce. Carroll said the research points to what she calls a Catholic college trifecta: substantial academic outcomes, significant personal growth, and by just 15 years post-graduation, the greatest return on investment in the higher education sector. You can actually find this data on the website of the ACCU, the Association of Catholic Colleges and Universities. And those academic outcomes that Carroll noted emerge primarily from the curriculum, a robust liberal arts foundation, and they result in strong graduate placements and career success. But these outcomes truly depend on our commitment to maintaining the centrality of the liberal arts, and particularly the humanities, in our curriculum. Massimo Fagioli, a professor of theology and religious studies at Villanova University, makes this point forcefully in his new book, Theology and Catholic Higher Education Beyond Our Identity Crisis. He expresses concerns about the way some Catholic colleges are responding to market pressures for workforce development style curriculum by undoing the very aspects of the curriculum that make them Catholic. Quote, especially in the United States, it is the brave new world of higher education that is now transforming the unparalleled large network of Catholic colleges and universities that Catholicism created. Lamenting that some Catholic colleges have begun cutting previously required courses in the liberal arts, he points to division even inside our theology departments, where theology is sometimes relegated to anti-Vatican II traditionalists, quote, without offering any alternative vision for the field. As the cost of higher education rises, some institutions are seeing theology as, quote, a luxury, a non-essential field among more practical ones. Fagioli argues that, quote, the marginalization of theology from the university is a significant problem for the church as a whole. It is also a step backward from the rise of democratization of theology faculty over the last 50 years, which included Catholic women teaching Catholic theology. That is, of course, something I have to care about as the president of a Catholic women's college. And may I digress to say that, after all, it was Sister Madaleva Wolf, the third president of St. Mary's College, who developed in 1943 the first program in the world that gave women access to graduate theology education. It would be impossible to overstate the impact of the Graduate School for Sacred Theology at St. Mary's, which over a period of more than 2 decades conferred 76 doctorates and 354 master's degrees. Madaleva's biographer, Gail Mandel, wrote that, quote, after close consultation with the faculty of the School of Sacred Theology, the Vatican set up its own graduate school of theology for women at Regina Mundi in Rome, patterning it on St. Mary's program. At the request of the Holy Father, Madaleva turned over all the documents pertaining to the school, including its curricular plan, to his representatives. Furthermore, St. Mary's agreed to validate the credits of graduates from the United States who completed their studies at Regina Mundi. When graduate theology for women became ubiquitous in Catholic higher education, St. Mary's phased out its program. But Madaleva's vision and originality was obvious when Bishop Edwin O'Hara remarked upon hearing that Notre Dame and Catholic University had designed graduate programs in theology for lay people that, quote, they were only following a suit that Madaleva had already played. But to return to my main point, because that was a little digression. If we take seriously that the first piece of the trifecta for Catholic higher education is substantial academic outcomes, then we should worry about a flattening of the liberal arts core at Catholic institutions, Both St. Ed's and St. Mary's offer many professional disciplines as well, but it's continuing the liberal arts core along with those professional disciplines that I think Fagioli is talking about. As he says, if theology and the education of the whole person are being diminished, how can the work of theology, of ethics, of the humanities, of the church take place on critical issues such as the abuse crisis? How is it possible to be a discerning church if we keep eliminating theology from Catholic higher education, thus accelerating the disappearance of public engagement by and with the church? I'm sure I'm preaching to the choir here, but we know that the study of theology does much more than offer a structured way for students to explore and deepen their faith, though that by itself is a worthy outcome. Theology also involves interpreting texts, debating moral issues, and engaging with different worldviews, and thus it hones our critical thinking skills. There are only a handful of disciplines that promote consideration of justice, human dignity, morality, and ethics, but you will find very few secular institutions that continue to require study in those disciplines. It would have been common to find them at an earlier era in higher education. Now, most Catholic colleges and universities have maintained broad humanistic study as part of their core curricula. But in this era, when the college degree is often seen as a transactional arrangement to deliver immediate payback on an investment, Fagioli warns that, quote, the disappearance of theology will make our Catholic campuses less diverse and inclusive. It will also make them less Catholic and less well-rounded. I think we can all agree that rigorous intellectual work required by theology, philosophy, and the other humanities should continue to animate our institutional curricula. They are disciplines that humanize knowledge and liberate students from the narrow confines of an instrumentalist education. The second essential element of Catholic higher education is dedication to Catholic social teaching, both in the curriculum and in co-curricular programs. If theology and philosophy educate the head and hone our skills in critical thinking and systematic reasoning, Catholic social teaching educates the heart through pillars that emphasize human dignity, family and community, human rights and responsibilities, a preferential option for the poor, the dignity of work, solidarity and the interconnectedness of all people, and the stewardship of creation. In a divisive time, these principles encourage students to see beyond partisanship and to approach leadership with a focus on justice, service, and the well-being of all people. In fact, on January 19th, 2024, Pope Francis addressed a delegation of the International Federation of Catholic Universities, and his remarks focused on the need for heart in Catholic higher education. He began by reminding us of the words Pope John Paul II used in his apostolic constitution, Ex Corde Ecclesiae. In its very title, this document establishes that the Catholic University is born, quote, from the heart of the Church. Indeed, Pope Francis notes that his predecessor did not say that the Catholic University is born of Christian reason, but rather he gave priority to the heart. The pontiff goes on to address some of the great challenges of our immediate moment, and you can see the quotation here. At a time when, unfortunately, education itself is becoming a business and great impersonal economic systems are investing in schools and universities as they do in the stock market, the Church's institutions must show they are of a different nature and act in accordance with a different mindset. An educational enterprise is not only based on perfect programs, efficient equipment, or good business practices. A greater passion must animate the university, as evidenced by the shared search for truth, a greater horizon of meaning, all lived out in a community of knowledge where the liberality of love is palpable. I think often about these words of the Holy Father and about how deeply he is in tune with the next generation. the generation we are responsible for accompanying as they pursue their dreams and shape their aspirations. In that same address, he exhorts us to keep our appetite and our zeal, that was a favorite word of our founder, for these central elements of a Catholic education, saying, "It is not enough to award academic degrees. It is necessary to awaken and cherish in each person the desire to be. It is not enough to prepare students for competitive careers. It is necessary to help them discover fruitful vocations, to inspire pathways of authentic existence, and to integrate the contribution of each individual within the creative dynamics of the larger community." Certainly, we need to reflect on artificial intelligence, but also on spiritual intelligence, without which persons remain strangers to themselves. Clearly, leaning into our Catholic identity will not only strengthen our shared bonds as Catholic institutions, but Pope Francis's words demonstrate that doing this can also provide us with an inspiring narrative for what distinguishes our sector in the broad landscape of higher education. And we can add to this a story that extends beyond our campus walls, a story of deep engagement in our communities. This is the third essential element of Catholic higher education. Beyond the classroom, Catholic colleges and universities emphasize seeking justice and putting knowledge and passion to work and to service through service learning programs, mission trips, and community engagement initiatives. These experiences teach students the value of servant leadership, helping them to develop the insight, compassion, humility, and resilience needed to work with community partners and address societal challenges. Another brief digression. Last May, I had the opportunity, in the company of a small group of leaders from other Catholic colleges and universities, to enjoy a private audience with Pope Francis. He spent over 30 minutes with us, delighting every person with his genuine warmth and interest. And he used this idea of head, heart, and hands in a simple but profound message. Educating the mind, he said, requires thinking about what we feel and what we do. Educating the heart requires us to feel deeply what we do and think. And educating the hands teaches us to be active disciples of Christ, to do what we think and feel. These essential impulses, he suggested, are connected in our bodies, but there can sometimes be tension among them. Education acknowledges that we have that tension, and it seeks balance and coherence. And I'll just point out, it was quite a beautiful moment, and I managed to be right there up over the pontiff's left shoulder. Not sure quite how I got positioned there, and he took a moment afterwards just to take a picture with each of us. It was just really remarkable, and kind of a life experience that I'll never forget. So I've already talked about the head and the heart, but these active and externally facing programs that I was talking about, service learning and other mission trips and things, these are the hands of Catholic higher education. They are places we make efforts to change the world, sometimes by changing our own backyards. And again, Pope Francis touches on this element of our work when he says, a Catholic university must make choices that reflect the gospel. It must take a stand and clearly show in its actions getting its hands dirty in the spirit of the gospel for the transformation of the world and in service to the human person. Now, finally, I would like to add to Pope Francis's head, heart, and hands the essential element of the voice. It is truly salient in our current climate that Catholic teaching supports nourishing and sustaining a community where dialogue and respectful engagement are paramount. Dialogue is an essential tool for living and leading in polarized times. By encouraging open discussions and leading on controversial topics within a framework of mutual respect, our institutions can help students develop the ability to listen, to remain curious, and to seek common ground. Catholic colleges often offer academic programs in conflict resolution, interfaith dialogue, and peace studies, and these can further prepare students to mediate disputes and to work toward constructive solutions in their communities and their workplaces. I'm fortunate at St. Mary's to work with a provost, Dr. Megan Zwart, who as a philosophy professor developed expertise in teaching dialogue skills. Over the last several years, she has been a dialogue fellow of the Aspen Institute, and she has worked to integrate dialogue into our core curriculum. By now, you have surely figured out that I am a fan of Pope Francis and his writings, especially his ruminations on higher education. Our provost appreciates his work as well, and she engages with his beautiful and powerful encyclical Fratelli Tutti when she says of our campus dialogue efforts, "What we won't do is participate in the destructive culture wars that reduce complex arguments to sound bites. We won't personally attack those who disagree or engage in what Pope Francis refers to as digital campaigns of hatred and destruction. Instead, choosing a culture of dialogue, encounter, and interpersonal relationships. In this, we will follow Pope Francis's exhortation, approaching, speaking, listening, looking at, coming to know and understand one another, and to find common ground. All these things are summed up in one word, dialogue. If we want to encounter and help one another, we have to dialogue." In a cloven era marked by deep divisions, Catholic colleges and universities can offer a holistic education, head, heart, hands, and voice that prepares graduates for a world of participation, healing, and repair. Now, some of you might be recalling that the title of this talk is Cleaving to Mission, Catholic and Holy Cross Education as Antidotes to Division. And perhaps you're wondering when I'm getting to Holy Cross. I wanted first to lay out the nature of the divisions we're encountering in our contemporary world. And then I also wanted to identify how Catholic higher education, irrespective of the specific charism that might inspire an institution, can bring shared values to bear on what we do and why we do it. But if Catholic is the main ingredient in this recipe, the various charisms of our founding orders provide the spices and the unique seasonings that ensure we are not uniform in our flavors. These charisms are connected to specific religious congregations, and they inform the discrete missions of individual Catholic colleges and universities and keep them tethered to the circumstances of their founding. This makes distinctive independence equal in importance to the interdependent membership in the larger Catholic family. If the word charism isn't familiar to you, a charism is the inspirational purpose that launches religious communities and keeps them going. It is their community mission and animating spirit. It gives specific religious communities their distinctive zest and imbues their daily practice with meaning. In times of change, religious communities turn back to their founding charisms or spirit, their purpose to discern how to move forward and sustain themselves. Our charism, St. Edward's and St. Mary's, is Holy Cross, even though within Holy Cross there are subtle differences. For example, I taste the piquancy of the sisters' version of the charism in my work at St. Mary's. And I also know the tang of the priest's version from both my time at the great university across the street from St. Mary's, where I earned my PhD, and from my many years at Stonehill College. I'm less familiar with the savory and wholesome version of the brothers' take on the charism, but you know it well here at St. Ed's. Early in my career, when I was a faculty member at Stonehill College, I lamented that Holy Cross did not have a saint whose life and extensive writings might help to ground and to flesh out the charism. We do have a saint today, but neither St. Andre Bessette nor Blessed Basil Moreau left us with a whole lot of words to live by, much less a detailed roadmap that could help Holy Cross institutions to think together about our shared charism. We were founded by different societies within the order, and our locations extend from coast to coast and from north to south. We don't have an Ignatius, a Benedict, an Augustine, or a Francis. There's no equivalent in our relatively young congregation to the spiritual exercises, no rule to return to and apply in the context of contemporary life, no admonitions or canticles. There are, of course, the constitutions of the congregation, but they are brief and largely about governance. Father Moreau left us a few writings, and they include some very quotable lines, such as the often restated, "We will not educate the mind at the expense of the heart," or the less repeated, but what I like to take as his defense of liberal education, quote, "We would not wish our students to be ignorant of anything they should know." But Father Moreau was a man of action. He was clearly busy doing things rather than reflecting on them. And he did a lot. The sum total of his accomplishments in the 1840s alone is quite remarkable. Back in fall of 1992, the year of the sesquicentennial celebration, say that 5 times, the sesquicentennial celebration, that's just a fancy word for 150-year anniversary of Holy Cross education in the United States. During that year, I began to learn more about Holy Cross, and I started to ask some different sorts of questions. I was still a faculty member, just 34 years old, you can do the math, and I had recently been tenured and promoted to associate professor at Stonehill College. I was puzzled that so early in my career and juggling 3 daughters, age 4 and under, I was one of 2 Stonehill faculty members invited to participate in the large events surrounding this 150-year anniversary, and this all happened at Notre Dame. But in hindsight, I can see things differently. It was at this celebration that I recognized a feeling of solidarity with others who were in attendance. I couldn't have named it, but there was an ineffable presence of something that connected all of us. And whether the then president of Stonehill, Father Bartley McFadden, had known it or not, by inviting me, he was subtly marking me as a member of the tribe. And I later learned, when he asked me to become provost, that when he stood next to me at an evening prayer service that weekend and realized I could sing every note of the simple tone Gregorian chant of Salve Regina, he decided I was going to be deeply connected to the future of an institution he loved and where his own time was mostly in the past. The following spring, Stonehill had its own local celebration of the sesquicentennial. Father Richard Mazziata wrote a brief but excellent summary of the history of Holy Cross for the Stonehill Alumni magazine, and a point that stood out for me was his argument that Holy Cross tradition is more vernacular than classical. That kind of got to me as I thought about, why don't we have a rule of Benedict or, some spiritual exercises to follow? Maybe we're more vernacular than classical. I could appreciate that, though I was still looking for something more formal. Father James Lackenmeyer, a Stonehill graduate who was at that time president of King's College in Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania, gave an address to the Stonehill community on April 30th, 1993, as the anniversary year came to a close. In it, he identified adaptability as the hallmark of our charism. He saw the absence of a founder with a particular spirituality as liberating. He noted that great leaders of all our institutions had had the freedom to transform their colleges and universities to meet the needs of the world in every era. I was one of 2 faculty respondents to Father Lackenmeyer's talk, and I still have the paper copy of my words printed on a daisy wheel printer, which students don't even know the existence of, probably. I truly engaged with Father Lackenmeyer's ideas about adaptability, and I expressed the need for further continued commitment to it. But even today, I'm still longing for something more than adaptability to characterize the shared parts of our charism. And I think Holy Cross colleges and universities would be better connected and more coherent if we had that. I want a sense of mission that is affirmatively mutual across our 8 institutions. And I want to cleave to that in our Holy Cross family of colleges and universities, even as we retain our important differences. Last fall, the presidents and provosts of all 8 Holy Cross institutions came together for the first time around a discussion of our shared charism. And I think there is a new commitment to continue bringing these leaders together, to learn more about each other, and to see if we might build a statement that characterizes our collective commitments and our common direction. In the meantime, as we all seek a cure for our cultural division, for an antitoxin to the lethal partitioning and cleaving of our social order, we could do worse than return to words spoken by Pope Francis. In a recent address at the Pontifical Gregorian University, he echoed his own earlier themes, asserting that the university must be transformed into a home for the heart, where there are fewer lecterns and more round tables, places where all see themselves as beggars of knowledge, touching the wounds of history, recognizing the dignity of everyone without exception. He promoted efforts in this talk to disarm thoughts, disarm words, disarm perspectives, and then, being on the same level, to look each other in the eyes. The Pope invited those gathered to an honest, constant, and profound discernment which seeks unity and never works for things that separate us from Christ's love or from the unity of the Church. He insisted that we must not limit ourselves to the words and norms of doctrine. Quote, "The way in which we use doctrine often reduces it to being without time, imprisoned in a museum, when instead," he explained, "it is alive." So, with humility, we return to contronyms. With no stardust to work miracles, we set out to dust our shelves. We buckle down and refuse to buckle under the pressures of the current moment. And we cleave to our missions, to our purposes, to our Catholic and Holy Cross identities as antidotes for the malaise of our times. Thank you.
I don't have a question, but I think you just gave an assignment to Richard Bausch and the Holy Cross Institute at St. Edward's University.
Well, I certainly think the Institute has done more than a lot of other entities that I can think of in the Holy Cross family to think about this sense of unity that we have across our congregation. And so I do think that, in the universities, we tend to be a little bit more, like somebody's off in Portland over here and they're off in Stonehill over there and I'm stuck in the middle of the country. And, how do we hear each other? How do we find those commonalities? Because I do think it will be more and more important. The Jesuit network has 28 colleges and universities. I'm sure that things are very different at Loyola Chicago than they are at Loyola Marymount. And yet Jesuit institutions need to be able to say and seem to be able to say very succinctly what it means to be Jesuit. And then they'll tell you about their own special flavor at their own institution. So I really think that if there's a way for us to keep working to bring it together, that it'll be important for our futures. Thank you.
President Conboy, thank you so much. I'm truly grateful for your presentation, and I might just share that before coming to hear this, I was teaching a course on financial learning and internship, and I had invited alumni to speak about experiences to current students. There was an individual who is a mission integration specialist and chaplain for Advent Health. There was another individual who was in marketing for a gaming firm in Norway. He spoke to us via Zoom. It was almost midnight his time. We heard also from an individual who's a sustainability consultant and another who works in family therapy. And what the 4 individuals had in common is that they were religious and theological studies majors or minors. And when I asked them about the skill sets that they developed while at St. Edward's University and the transferable skills, all 4 agreed on their ability to navigate difficult conversations. And they said that, especially the individual who was in marketing for this gaming firm, said you can get hard skills in different contexts, but the soft skills are incomparable. And they were developed here at this university, and especially through courses in religious and theological studies. It was extraordinary to hear that, and it seems to echo really what you shared in your presentation about thinking about antidotes for division in our times, and the important role that theological background and the humanities in general could play in this moment.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You know, it is by studying these disciplines that you get the practice, obviously, of, you know, thinking deeply, crafting your argument, but then also that you recognize at some point that your perfectly crafted argument, if it's not going to be invitational to other people, is not going to actually serve you very well. And so I do think that, you know, it's both the content and it's also the skills, as you put it, that our students get from studying in these disciplines that they may not recognize in the moment that they are studying, but that they will see somewhere down the road as you know, a certain kind of return on investment. Thank you.
So as a member also, I do want to say thank you for making the case theology. That was
I was an English major, but
yeah. We're all in the same boat.
That's right.
But I definitely wanted to thank you for that, and kind of really engage with the idea of the contronym, where I think Catholicism itself is contronymic in a sense that it is universal and
Yes.
open, but also a distinctive identity. So maybe that might be more in the realm of paradox. You engage this contronymic understanding of Catholicism as open, but also as an identity in kind of those conversations where dialogue is not encouraged by maybe other institutions that have kind of that like an understanding of Catholic as mainly a identity and not necessarily open, like this intra-Catholic dialogue of to be Catholic is to have a sense of openness, and how to dialogue with those who identify Catholicism as a sense of identitarian tribalism, in a sense. How do, as an institution, have y'all engaged that, and what would you suggest for other institutions that view Catholicism in the openness category?
Yeah, you know, I'm not sure if I can say that I've made the comparison to other kinds of institutions, but what I'd say, maybe I can take your question and sort of reshape it slightly. At all our institutions, you know, at one time, I'll use St. Mary's as an example, the sisters were in every role, right? They were the president, they were all the vice presidents, they were, you know, a big percentage of the faculty, and the rest of the faculty was Catholic. So today, it's a very different picture. We don't have a single sister in employment at the college. The last of the sisters who was employed retired 2 years ago, you know, and well past when many people would have retired. And so, you know, we still have sisters on our board, and we have a shared campus with them, and the convent is there. But the place where growth is happening among the sisters is international. It's not in the United States. So I would just say that at all the Catholic institutions where I've been, I've seen over time this sort of growth of the faculty and a new, as the faculty has turned over, that there are fewer and fewer people on the faculty who would self-identify as Catholic. And when they come to a Catholic institution, again, I'm just speaking about my experience, and we talk to them in the hiring process about what it is in the mission of the institution that speaks to them and that they would like to be a part of, often it is justice, right, that is pulled out as that thing which they can identify with. But then there are times when there may be a justice issue that the church takes a particular position on, and you find yourself in a situation where maybe you're a non-Catholic faculty member and you can't swallow that particular perspective. And these are the moments when I think inside our own institutions, we have people who say, like, we can't do that because we're a Catholic college. That would be the right and just thing to do. I mean, they would take the language right from the Mass. That would be right and just, and we can't do it here at our college. I can think of something that happened at my own institution just, not that long ago. And so I think in this moment that's very divided, what I'm hoping is that we can make headway on helping people think about the things we can do because we are a Catholic college rather than the things we can't do because we're a Catholic college. And I think particularly about efforts around equity and inclusion and the fact that many institutions are going to find that their hands are tied even if they would like to do these things. And we can actually point to our founding. We can point to our congregations, all of them within Holy Cross, and say access, inclusion, and equity have been part of the founding cause for the congregation. So that's where I'm kind of going these days with my own community at St. Mary's, where, a year ago, because, something happened that people didn't like on campus, there was one group saying, oh, DEI is dead at St. Mary's. This year, they're feeling really proud that when they interview faculty members for new jobs or replacement positions, that those faculty members are looking at our website and they're saying, are you still doing these things? And they're saying, yes, because we're committed to them and because they are connected to the sisters and they are connected to our Catholic vision. So that's, I know it's not exactly the question you answered, but I'm not, I just haven't ever had a reason to point to a non-Catholic institution versus a Catholic institution on this, but I've noted the paradox, if we go back to your word of having inside Catholic institutions, people who are sometimes actually hostile to the Catholic identity of the institution. Hopefully we don't have that many of those, but people who, if they don't deeply know the tradition, just can't go with some of the things that they feel are contrary to their own positions on an issue of justice, for example. Sure.
Well, coming from like a Holy Cross students,
Yeah. Well, first of all, I would say, I talked about head, heart, hands, and voice. Use them, and so if something like that speaks to you, then I would say, ask yourself, like that can be a reflective practice, right? To say, how am I using my head, my heart, my hands, and my voice? This week, I had a group of students on campus, who wrote a letter to the editor of our newspaper, and made some claims in it that were actually like not quite factually right. So what do I do? Because I don't want to be the president of the college who's out there, publicly correcting a student on something. On the other hand, the things that were said were getting picked up and, kind of repeated in other places. They involved a commencement speaker. So this felt like I don't need something to explode here either. But I wrote a letter to the editor and just said, I'm always happy when students use their voices and when they advocate for things they care deeply about. And we're a learning organization. And I hope there are always opportunities to learn, for me to keep learning too. But in that spirit, I might need to make a couple corrections here. So I would just say, use your voice, even if you're going to make some errors sometimes. Like, I think that's great, right? You get out there and you try some things, you take some risks. And that's what a risk is, right? Sometimes your risk pays off and it was the right risk. And other times you learn something from taking the risk. And, don't involve yourself in really risky behavior. But I'm speaking about something more in the spiritual plane here, or the activist plane. The other thing I guess I would say is ask for what it is that you need in your education, and in the opportunities that are available to you on your campus. And I say that to say, I had a group of students come to talk with me recently, and they felt that we don't have a wide enough viewpoint perspective in the speakers that we bring to campus. And I have to take that seriously, right? I want to go back and actually do a little inventory of the last couple of years and look at all the speakers that we brought to campus and say, have we represented? Like, if a student characterized herself as a very, observant, conservative Catholic, has she heard voices that are meaningful to her? And if a student is frustrated with something that the church has a position on, has she heard a voice that maybe she has helped her to think about that? And so, again, all our speakers are not about positions of the Catholic Church, obviously, but we should know that students feel fed by what it is that they are, paying tuition for and everything else. So I think asking for what you need, asking for coursework that might be in areas that don't currently exist, and maybe starting slow, right? I had a couple students come to me last week. I just am thrilled that these students came to me, right? But they first sent me a list of demands. So I said, and what they wanted me to say yes to were totally things I want to do, but I'd never been asked even, but I was demanded before I was requested. And so they wrote to me because they are very concerned about the fact that we live on our college sits on land that was the Miami and the Pokagon Band of Potawatomi. So we have an land acknowledgement statement, much like yours, and we read that at most events. Now these students are in a justice class, and they started this. They have a project that they have to do. So they chose the project that they wanted to look into what the conditions were that the Pokagon and the Miami are experiencing. The Miami have just been approved for reapplication of federal recognition. They don't have federal recognition. And so they came to me to say, we want you to give $15,000 to the Pokagon, to the Miami, to help them with the legal, advice they need and other things. We want 2 courses in the curriculum to be taught on, the history of the native people whose land we're sitting on. There's one other thing they wanted. Anyway, there were 3 things. So I said to them, I think all of these are reasonable. I have to think about this $15,000 and where I would take that from, because, student tuition dollars pay for a lot of what we do. And so, this is your thing, but it might not be what every student is wanting funding spent on. But we have other funds that come in and donations and things. We probably have some place that we can find that. But the 2 courses, I had to say, faculty determine what the curriculum is, but we can incentivize that. We can offer some course development stipends for faculty members who might be interested in developing this. I don't know who we have on the faculty who might be interested in that, but let's put that out there. I'll make the effort to get that started. So, I think those are the kinds of things that I would say I always love to hear from students, that this is something they're dedicated to, they're passionate about. There were 5 students who came to my office, and we sat and had a really good conversation. Only one of them was a Native person herself, and not a person from either of the particular tribes that we are, in conversation with. So I just say that to answer your question. I think somebody up here had a question too. Oh, well, I'll let you control the mic.
And thanks as well for your presentation. I'm a graduate of this institution about 43 years ago, and the brothers did a good job of me, and I went on to teach theology myself. I was interested also in your presentation on charism and how charism can continue in a Catholic higher education institution where, as I believe you stated, that there are no longer any sisters who are teaching. I'm not sure about there are any brothers at Holy Cross or here at St. Ed's. I used to teach at Our Lady Lake University, and about 5-10 years ago, the last sister taught there. But they have a program there where they have associates, and they made a special effort to teach the faculty about the history of the sisters and their charism in order to spread that and inculcate that into their curriculum and touch the students and let that charism continue to live and thrive and grow at that institution where the sisters no longer are there as teachers. And I was just wanted to present that and maybe the possibility of continuing to grow this charism and spirit of the.
Yeah, thank you for that question. I think there's a lot there, first of all. So what I would say is, I don't know what the structure is here at St. Edward's. I have a vice president for mission at St. Mary's, so someone who kind of guides the mission conversations there. That position has existed for decades at St. Mary's, and I think it's kind of my impression, though I could be I could just have blind spots. I'm perfectly open to that possibility. I do think sisters began this process earlier than priests, and I don't know so much about brothers, but I think that the sisters began to see the decline in vocations at an earlier moment, and they began to ask themselves, how can we collaborate with our lay collaborators in ways that ensure that we kind of set the institution up to be the same institution forever. And I think that, these kinds of programs that happen on campus, the orientation of new faculty members, these are things that can be really important. But I also think there's another thing I've seen happen in some of the other orders. So the Jesuits have a program where Jesuit faculty, staff, leaders from different Jesuit institutions come together, and they go to Spain, and they kind of I think they call it in the footsteps of Ignatius of Loyola, and so they they kind of go to these places that were special spiritual places. They get connected to the charism. And I've had some friends, including one who who worked at the College of the Holy Cross in Worcester. And she's not a Catholic, but she went on that program and felt deeply committed afterwards in a kind of new way to what the Jesuit charism was. And I think Holy Cross has had some fits and starts with doing a little bit of that with visits to Le Mans. It's happened, and then it's been off for a while, and some of it has to do with how many people can the place sustain over the period. But I've heard that the program has actually been quite good. It's just that not as many people, I think, are going. And if our institutions could, not just once a year send 2 or 3 people, but maybe several times a year send people in the company of people from other Holy Cross institutions, I think that would be very, very powerful to make it happen and really make it let it grow. I have the feeling that maybe if Richard is standing, well, my last slide is just thank you all.
Well, thank you for a rich and stimulating talk. You've given us such a gift. And that we'll be thinking about this, and we'll be talking about the ideas that you shared with us for a long, long time.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Richard. And as I told Richard yesterday, I got in an Uber, and this young woman said to me, "So, what are you doing in Austin?" And I said, "Oh, well, I'm going to be giving a talk at St. Edward's." "Oh, 2 of my best friends went to St. Ed's," and I said, "Oh, that's great." And then she said, "Well, what's your talk on?" So I gave her you might wish I'd given you the 5-minute version too, but I gave her a relatively quick version. And there's an Uber driver out there. She said to me at the end of it, Katie, I have learned something today, and this contronym thing, this is sticking with me. So anyway, I appreciated that, and I certainly appreciate all of you and your long patience today.
Oh, thank you again. Thank you so very much. Yeah. I would also like to thank the many people who have made this McCarthy Lecture possible, starting with Dean Sharon Nell. Sharon is the Dean of Arts and Humanities here at St. Edward's, and especially for opera. Thank you. And there's Mike Beck. Thank you to Kelvic's Auditorium outside. We hope that you have, we look for McCarthy Century speakers. Good night. God bless.